Hi, it's me, Sibs, your host for the Private Property Podcast, which is what you're watching right now. Listen, today's episode is all about being shocked about what the law has to say about putting in an offer on that dream property you've been dying to get your hands on. But before we get to that, let me tell you, as I tell you every time, all roads lead to the property show.
This year, we're back in real life and virtual with content generated in our metaverse studio. We've designed the exhibition space to replicate the world's most popular property game and added in activities for the whole family, including an indoor park and play area. The game board is divided into 4 journeys, namely First-Time Homebuyers Boulevard, Investment Avenue, Sellers Street, and Renters Road. Visit thepropertyshow.co.za for more information and to get your tickets today. The Property Show 2022, 27th to the 28th of August at the Sandton Convention Center. No matter where you are on your property journey, we've gathered the experts.
I've said it before, I'll say it again, all roads lead to the property show. That's happening on the 27th and the 28th of August at the Sandton Convention Center right here in Johannesburg. And if you want to get your hands on a ticket, which I highly suggest you do, click on the link in the comments section and it'll lead you to the little jobby that lets you buy a ticket. You can join us virtually from anywhere around the world, but it would just be better if you were here in person to hear and get all of the little gems that we'll be giving you over that whole weekend. But back to today's episode, my guest, Simone Soodyall from CNG Attorneys, is going to tell us why we will be shocked about what the law has to say about putting in an offer. Simone, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm great. Simone, let's start with the basics. At which stage of the home buying journey should one need to make an offer to purchase?
So I think the first thing we have to remember is you need to always assess your financial ability before you make an offer to purchase. The problem that we face is that a lot of the times people sign for offers to purchase and they realize, well, I don't actually have the money. So if you find a property that you like, whether you find it online or whether you find it at a show house, then the moment that you realize you can afford that property, whether it be in cash or it be by a bond, like a pre-approved bond, then I would say at that stage you sign the offer.
Can you tell us what exactly the law says about putting in an offer to purchase?
So the offer to purchase is actually a binding contract. There's quite a bit that the law has to say about it. It's an exchange of rights and responsibilities, obviously, between the seller and the buyer. But essentially, if the buyer signs an offer to purchase, that offer then goes to the seller, and the seller then has 3 options. The seller can either completely ignore that offer and it falls away, or the seller can accept it as is, and then the transfer process starts, well, the entire sale and purchase process starts. Or the seller can say, well, I understand what you're making as an offer, but I want to amend it and rather counter propose. So one of the things we have to remember is, like I said, it's a binding contract in any event. And sometimes an offer to purchase might have a suspensive condition. Like, for example, if you want to sell your first property, reap the proceeds from that sale, and then use those proceeds to purchase your second property. Or, for example, if you're waiting for an approved bond and the bond is then going to come in and pay for the property. Those are what we call suspensive conditions. Another thing to note is a seller has what's known as a 72-hour clause. That is that the seller is entitled to retain the property on the market for a period of 72 hours, even if a buyer has put in an offer. And if the seller finds another buyer which has a better offer, for example, maybe not a very strenuous suspensive condition, for example, if the second buyer is going to just pay in cash, then the seller by notice can advise the buyer, the initial buyer, look, I have another offer on the table. This is what they're offering me. Can you better this? Alternatively, I'm going to have to cancel our OTP, as it's called, which is the buyer's offer to purchase, and then the seller can then move forward with the second offer. Other things that pertain to the offer to purchase, which is quite important for everybody to remember and is also a legal implication, is that once you sign this offer to purchase, or in some spheres it's just plainly called the sale and purchase agreement, the buyer and seller must indicate the defects in the property. So usually what happens is there would be a pre-purchase inspection, and the seller would then go through all the latent defects, and that would become a list which then gets added to this offer. So all of that together, that's all known as the legal implications of making such an offer. At the bottom line is that the buyer must be aware of what they're signing. They cannot just unilaterally put in an offer and decide to ignore it at a later stage because of all these legal implications.
I think that would lead me to one of my next questions is what are some of the most common mistakes you see when people are now entering these property transactions?
Yeah. Like I said, one of the common mistakes is the issue about defects. A lot of the time, sellers believe that if they don't say something about latent defects, then it will just be ignored, which is not the case. So sellers and buyers must work together to make sure that this transfer process and the sale and purchase itself goes through smoothly. A buyer is entitled to know when there's a latent defect on the property. A latent defect, for example, is where you have dampness in the wall and there's paint over it. It's not visible to the naked eye like a crack, for example, but it is something that can cause a problem later on. So the buyer needs to be made aware of that. Another mistake that a lot of people make is regarding estate agents' commission. I know my colleagues in the property sphere, we are all colleagues in the property sphere, so we obviously deal with estate agents quite a bit. And one of the things that everybody must be aware of is they need to be mindful of how much the estate agent is actually charging. It's usually between 6 to 6.5%, which is their commission of the entire purchase price. Moreover, they must make sure the estate agent is registered with the board. It's so important to be able to hold people accountable. And the last mistake that I find a lot of people make, because I'm an attorney in the property industry, a lot of people believe that an ordinary attorney is the same as a conveyancer. Now, they must be able to differentiate between the person who runs up and down to court and the person who sits and drafts the transfer documents. So when a person is engaging with an attorney, they must make sure that attorney is a qualified conveyancer, is admitted and enrolled as a conveyancer with the Legal Practice Council, and has an updated Fidelity Fund certificate. It's very important to ensure that those three things in particular are dealt with before the property transfer goes any further.
Listen, I love checks and balances. I love verifying. I love regulatory bodies that make sure that people are following the correct rules. So what I'd ask is that in addition to now the buyer and the seller, you've mentioned the conveyancer and the attorney. Who else should be involved in this entire process?
So I think it all depends on who the buyers and sellers then engage. Obviously, like I said, you would sometimes get an estate agent if you've asked an estate agent to assist with your sale. If you own a unit in a sectional title block, or you own a unit in a homeowners association, you would then also, by implication, have the involvement of the managing agent. Now, the managing agent is the body, or rather the company sometimes, who would give you the levy clearance certificates just before you pass transfer. We also cannot ignore our municipalities, because the municipality will then give us your rates clearance certificate, for example. You also have, if you have taken a bond or you want to cancel your bond when you're selling your property, you have a bond attorney to either deal with the cancellation or the registration of the bond. And of course, I think for a lot of people, you have to have that person who just gives you that second opinion about the house you're about to buy. Because in as much as we would love to believe that at first glance we know exactly what we want, sometimes it's good to have a second opinion before we actually sign that offer to purchase.
I watch a lot of HGTV, confessing right off the bat, and I'll find that I'm always confused with these like families who say, oh, our home is in escrow, and then they've got two bonds going on at the same time. They need to sell the one to be able to buy the other.
Yeah.
Now they've got two bonds going on. I've never understood it. It's always been the most confusing concept to me. But
Yeah.
Imagine a buyer has to sell an existing home before they can proceed to purchase the next one. What steps would they have to follow in that instance?
So it would be your same ordinary transfer steps. Obviously, you would then have to, first of all, secure your purchaser. So if we're talking about home A, that the seller now wants to sell, and they will then become a buyer for home B. So for home A, the seller would then have to secure the purchaser, secure the sale and purchase agreement, engage with the conveyancer, make sure that the transfer documents are signed, make sure that the rates are paid, if there's levies involved, make sure that the levy clearance certificate is obtained, which is obviously when you pay your levies. Then make sure the documents are compiled. If you already have a bond on house A, then you would engage, or rather the conveyancer would engage in a bond attorney who would then assist in the cancellation of that bond.
Compared to about 5 years
Once
ago, would you say the process is different today, or are we still working with the same processes we have been?
I think the process is the same. It's just obviously a little bit faster now, because everything has gone electronic. So one of the good things about conveyances nowadays is there's a program that actually allows a conveyancer to track the conveyancing process. And every time that a step is completed, the buyer and seller are notified upon that completion of that step. So it makes things a lot easier, and it gives everybody access to this information instead of just having one person dealing with it.
Simone, tell me more about CNG attorneys and what you guys actually do.
So funny enough, we're actually an all-female firm. We
Yes!
believe in a
Sisters are doing
And,
it for themselves. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We deal with all forms of civil matters, criminal matters. We are heavily involved in the property sphere as well. We play the role of both conveyancing attorneys and also the attorney for the managing agent. And sometimes we're the attorney for the buyer who hasn't had that opportunity to actually discuss the latent defect with the seller, and now they're pursuing the seller for some sort of damages. So whichever role that we find ourselves in, the most important thing we do is we make our clients priority. So we make sure we succeed in their matters and we do the best that we can.
In a situation where, say, I'm a potential buyer, I've put in a purchase to offer, I've done the calculations and used the tools there, privateproperty.co.za, and discovered I can afford this kind of property, then COVID hits, I don't have a job anymore, I can't afford this, but I've already put in an offer to purchase and I need to cancel it. How do I go about doing that?
So everything should be done by way of written notice. I think nobody should ever feel that if they just ignore something, it will go away. That never happens. The problem is that if you are then going to cancel an offer, you are going to have legal implications to that cancellation. Like, for example, a buyer could forfeit whatever they've already maybe paid towards the transfer. Sometimes the buyer could be held liable for the estate agent's commission because the estate agent now got involved and you are now buying the property. Sometimes, if depending on where you are in the transfer process, the attorney could hold the buyer responsible for the costs that were already paid in respect of the transfer. But I think the most important thing to do is to notify the seller as soon as you can. And unfortunately, there are going to be legal implications depending on where in the transfer process you decide to cancel.
So, speaking of cancellation, obviously there are a myriad of reasons why someone would be led to doing such a thing, and some of those are very unfortunate at times, really, really tragic stories. Would you say in the current economic climate, we've seen more or less of this kind of cancellation or offers to purchase? What is the property market doing given the current economic climate? I'm not going to talk about inflation. It hurts my soul.
Well, I think, look, it's not easy to say whether it's more or less. I think because our economy is, it's growing and then it dipped quite badly. We're all feeling the after effects of what's been happening. I think COVID really affected everybody negatively. We have a lot of pressure, like you said, from inflation. We also have an ever increasing interest rate, and a lot of incomes for households are being put under great pressure. So I would say that the bottom line is property remains a good investment. The problem is that sellers are not getting the value that they deserve from the properties they want to sell. And sometimes you would find buyers find the properties on the market somewhat unaffordable. So I think in the current economic climate, obviously, if the interest rate continues to climb, if we suffer further job losses, we will be looking at a decline in buyer activity and sales for properties.
Ay, ay, ay. One last thing. We all know that all roads lead to the property show. You've seen the lineup, girl. What are you most
Yes.
looking forward to from the event?
I think the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is obviously the networking. You guys have a really good lineup in place, and I'm so excited to learn from them. I'm so excited to be involved in this continuously developing industry, which is property. And I think it looks like it's a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be a part of it, actually.
Listen, we are privateproperty.co.za, and all we're trying to do is connect everyone to the heart of property, which is what is going to be happening at the property show on the 27th and 28th of August. Simone Soodyall from C&G Attorneys, thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to meeting you at the property show and having more conversations with you about what the law has to say about all of these houses and small flats that we're trying to buy with the money we don't have.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Always. It is time for our competition moment. Someone is going to walk away with a whopping 500 rands in cash and a ticket to the property show, which you know is happening when? The 27th and the 28th of August 2022 at the Santan Convention Center. Today's winner, again, like a sad person, I'm doing my own drum roll. Pramila Padiachi, congratulations. You are the winner today. You get 500 rands coming your way and a ticket to the property show happening on the 27th and 28th. I need like an audience or like one of those things. Pramila, we look forward to seeing you there. Otherwise, that was today's episode of the Private Property Podcast, hosted by myself, Sibs. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Goodbye.
This year, we're back in real life and virtual with content generated in our metaverse studio. We've designed the exhibition space to replicate the world's most popular property game and added in activities for the whole family, including an indoor park and play area. The game board is divided into 4 journeys, namely First-Time Homebuyers Boulevard, Investment Avenue, Sellers Street, and Renters Road. Visit thepropertyshow.co.za for more information and to get your tickets today. The Property Show 2022, 27th to the 28th of August at the Santon Convention Center. No matter where you are on your property journey,